This session is on community philanthropy, reimagining the sector. My name is Ese Emerhi, and I am the Global Network Weaver for the Global Fund for Community Foundations, and I'm also serving today in another capacity as the Sub-Saharan Regional Representative for Africa for Alliance Magazine. Today's webinar, as I mentioned earlier, is about community philanthropy, looking specifically at the different models of doing development differently and what that looks like with regard to the shrinking civic space and funding flows. I have with me three dynamic speakers, really friends, who will each share their perspectives of this topic and why this really matters. In a minute, I'll introduce them individually in just a bit, but first, let me just set the context for today's conversation. Community philanthropy, people-led and people-centered approaches and models is becoming all the more relevant against the backdrop of changing funding flows and increasingly restrictive operating environments for civil society actors and organizations, not just in Africa, but in many parts of the world. Community philanthropy organizations are championing in their own ways, new ways of deciding and doing that really centers local agency, relationships, and trust. And in doing so, transforming the sector really from the bottom up. Traditional tools used by funders, often these tools are developed outside of communities, miss some of the complexities and nuances of what community-led processes and outcomes are all about. And because of this, they sometimes can contribute to deepening already existing inequalities or inequities. There is the need to showcase pathways between the traditional development system and understand and consider community philanthropy as an alternative model for durable, sustainable development. These pathways would help to establish how the international aid system, hopefully, can be more of service to making community philanthropy effective in the aid system. I have one overarching question, which I hope the speakers today would shed some light on, including some of the direct questions I have. And this question is, in building a reimagined aid sector, how can we better support, elevate, and champion some of these emergent practices so that they can take hold and build a more durable sector? And I guess lastly, my comments, I just want to say that community philanthropy is one tool we have at our disposal for transformative change. And I think the speakers today will share from their perspectives, their contexts in using community philanthropy in their work. Just a note on housekeeping, we have this Slido tool. Please do say hello in the chat, which you will be able to view on the right-hand side of your screen. Later, we'll be taking questions from the audience, so make sure you also get your questions into Slido on the right-hand side of your screen. You have the option of both asking questions and upvoting others. We'll be keeping an eye on this throughout the webinar, and towards the Q&A at the probably the last 15 minutes of our time together today, we'll select questions to put to the panel during the Q&A section. So let's get into it. I am going to introduce my first speaker, and this is Graciela Hobson. For the past 6 years, Graciela has been Kumar Network's Executive Director, really since 2017. As a consultant, teacher, and researcher, Graciela is also the author of articles and books on themes linked to public policies, social movements, and philanthropy. I'll also just introduce all of the speakers at once, so at least you just know who they are before they start speaking. My next speaker is Barbara Nost. She is the CEO of the Zambian Governance Foundation for Civil Society, ZGF. Before coming to Zambia, Barbara worked in various long and short-term assignments broadly related to governance, institution building, and civil society development in Europe and in Africa. Having worked in the formal aid sector in various capacities, she got frustrated and experienced the power imbalances that come into play when actors in the global north and in the global south collaborate. She believes that local communities have the power and resourcefulness to shape their own development without having to rely on external funding. Her main interest is to transform ZGF into a local community foundation that can truly sustain itself with resources available within Zambia. And last but not least, we have Dr. Moses Isoba. He is the Executive Director of the Uganda National NGO Forum, a civil society platform for governance and democracy influencing in Uganda. He is also currently a member of the Reimagining INGOs Ringo Social Lab, which is a group of practitioners reimagining INGOs through disruption, innovation, and systematic thinking. As part of Ringo, I would say he is also the idea carrier of the prototype of language and lexicon. He also currently serves as the member of the advisory group on locally led development for Bond UK. So thank you again for all of our three speakers, and I'm really looking forward today to your perspective, your insights in elevating, leveraging community philanthropy as we think about this exercise of reimagining the aid sector or transforming the aid sector. So my first question is going to go to Graciela. Hi, Graciela. I hope your screen is on and people can see you. Great. And I'll just sort of phrase this or kind of frame it for your question. So philanthropy, as we know it as an institutional practice, maintains the social order and thus has, as I mentioned in my beginning presentation, it's perpetrated entrenched society disparities which hold power from the legacy of colonialism. So my question to you now is, what role can international actors play in supporting and growing local giving and community philanthropy as a form of and force for community-led development, which increases local ownership and accountability, and therefore strengthening the legitimacy of local civil society?
Thank you, Ese. Good morning, afternoon to all of you. First of all, I would like to thank Ese and Alliance Magazine for the invitation to participate in this relevant debate in the context that we are facing at different levels related to the crisis of representative democracy and development models that have historically left large sectors of the populations to situation of extreme poverty and exclusion. Before answering the question, I would like to present Comoa Network, organization that I'm running since 2017, because from my perspective, this is an important starting point for approaching the analysis. Comoa Network was created in Brazil in 2012 and gathers 16 members, independent local grant-making organizations involving thematic funds, community funds, and community foundations that support civil society initiatives in the field of social justice, human rights, and community development, focusing on agendas linked to racial justice, climate change, gender rights involving women and LGBT communities and their intersections. The concept of independence is relating to the fact that these organizations have their own governance and mobilize resources from different sources. All of these funds donate to groups, movements, and civil society leaders. The grants are focused in access and recognition of rights, specifically on political minorities. For Comoa members, donating to civil society is a way of understanding development from a perspective that is certainly not the mainstream, because the focus is on social transformation with and for communities. Considering that Brazil is a country with huge inequalities and with an inconclusive democracy, From our point of view, community philanthropy can play a strategic role. However, it's important to highlight that philanthropy is a complex space in which different actors and initiatives coexist. In fact, there is no a single philanthropy, but philanthropies with an S, because it's important to recognize the diversity of actors and dynamics in the field. Brazil has a developed and significant philanthropy ecosystem represented mostly by corporate and family foundation, but is not a donor philanthropy as they mainly operate in the execution of their own projects. Although the amount of social investment from the private foundation is significant, around $1 billion in 2020, these resources do not reach civil society and is not focused in social justice and community development agendas and initiatives. From our point of view, community philanthropy is not an isolated concept or practice, but is an approach that emerged from the principle of recognizing the capacity of communities to propose solutions to their own problems based on their assets, knowledge, and needs. It's a philanthropy that does not provide ready-made solutions or pretend to install top-down agendas. Strengthening organizations, groups, and movements that already exist through flexible grant making, avoiding complex bureaucracy processes, and ensuring the democratization of access to financial resources are the principles that guide community philanthropy practice and approaches. It's important to highlight that the concept of community philanthropy must be understood from a material perspective based on practices and experiences, so it cannot be considered as universal because it's related to each social and political context. Guided by Shift the Power approach, we came to the conclusion that there are many and diverse actors playing strategic roles in the community philanthropy field, including ancestral modality of doing philanthropy like indigenous and Black communities, experiences that we need to bring to the center of the debate. In the Global South, there are several local independent funds strongly consolidated with great expertise in managing and donated resources, monitoring and evaluating process, and with enormous experience in directly supporting traditional and local communities. They should not be considered just as intermediaries, but as partners, because they have the knowledge and the ability to articulate with a wide range of actors and networks without seeking protagonism, but understanding that they are strategic actors in the transformation processes and development. Comoa Network is a political player. Its mission is to strengthen and expanding independent local philanthropy, giving visibility to the members' initiatives and stimulating the production of knowledge to consolidate advocacy actions in the philanthropic system. In 2021, we decided to develop a mapping focused on independent funds in Brazil. The study was developed to introduce political thinking about the philanthropy field. The inclusion of this dimension is crucial to understand the role played by philanthropy in the process of transforming realities. This is because transforming means breaking pre-existing pacts based on colonial logics, patriarchy, racism, sexism, etc., recognizing diversity as a core principle. We mapped 31 organizations. That means that we have identified 17 independent funds beyond the 16 network members. From the study, we were able to confirm that the practices and dynamics of community philanthropy are present in the Brazilian context. The study is available in English, just a summary, in Comoa's website, and gathers complete data and information about independent and community philanthropy in Brazil. However, the study reveals some important challenges since the financial resources came mostly from international philanthropy and cooperation, which indicates that Brazilian independent philanthropy is still very connected with the development models of the global north. Despite these challenges, in general terms, from the data analyzed, there is a strong perception that the work that independent funds have been doing is extremely important in the context of development and transformation processes, with excellent growth potential in Brazil and for sure in the global south. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Graciela. There is a lot to unpack there in your presentation, and I think I hope that we'll be able to get into it perhaps in the Q&A, but I just wanted to, sort of highlight this space that Comore Network fits, as you rightly said, is a unique space since the donor community in Brazil does not see some of the independent funds or the communities, marginalized communities that you support through your member, to the 16 members that are part of Comore. So they don't see them, one, and they don't fund them. And the work that Comore Network does is really sort of highlighting the way these communities are actually operating. And I liked the context, or at least the approach, the way that you're framing the role of Comore Network as really a political player in expanding local philanthropy. And I think that's really important as we continue this conversation. But I'm going to move on now to Barbara. I know you're just coming from the Ringo Shift the Power webinar just held an hour ago around understanding how Shift the Power can really be understood, first of all, in local communities and how that can drive change. But for my question to you now is, how can community philanthropy, how we are defining it, this is something that is based on assets, trust, and people, really help to direct and leverage external resources in ways that can build on and do not displace what is already there? I know GZF is really showcase and illustrate that there is funding and there is resources available locally. But for external players and donors, what role can they play? How can they support this?
Okay, now I'm unmuted. Thank you very much, Ese. Thank you for having me. ZGF and community philanthropy. If I talk about ZGF and community philanthropy, I need to insert one short statement to understand where we're coming from. We started off as a typical donor-funded pool fund that was meant to support civil society organizations in Zambia. Very quickly, it was turned into a community into a foundation that supports local civil society for various reasons. I don't want to go into details, but that's the background. We have delved into integrating community-led development and community philanthropy in 2017. After we have met, we attended the Global Summit for Community Foundations in Johannesburg 2016. This was our light bulb moment where everything turned around at ZGF. We came back enlightened, we came back enraged, we came back encouraged, we came back as a new team of people that attended, and we from that at this point our journey towards integrating community philanthropy has started. So how we do that in Zambia, we see ourselves as an organization that facilitates process. We help communities we work with identifying assets they have available. We help them realizing that the community assets actually exist. We help them deciding over how to use those resources to improve their own community or to design community projects they would like to work on. And we also facilitate setting up of committees to make those projects work. So we are a process facilitator. Secondly, we use participatory grant making. I mean, this has become the new thing for many organizations that that want to move working more closely with local communities. We use participatory grant making in two ways. Community projects are peer reviewed by other communities, and district-based or CBO projects that we support of local civil societies are peer reviewed by other civil society organizations from the same location and subject matter specialists that are also civil society representatives. So for us, it's very important that the power is handed over, that the power of deciding who gets who gets what kind of grant is handed over to the relevant people at the local level. Then we also invest in local structures, in building local, not physical structures. We have invest our time in helping building local institutional structures. And this has a very simple reason. Local communities can only access government funding or other funding if they have a registration. They cannot access the constituency development fund, that is a fund provided by the central government, if they're not a cooperative or a registered non-profit. So we help them setting up the basic governance and management structure, which allows them to access funds, and we also support them in all the nitty-gritty, like drafting simple articles of association and set basic systems in place that makes them that helps them operate independently as a community structure. We invest also in local asset building. We help local structures to manage community assets on behalf of the community, be it land, if they're lucky, if they have land, if they have infrastructure, maybe they have an energy hub, or maybe they have finances. We would like to build community structures that hold assets on behalf of the community and manage them for the benefit of the community. Then we also assist with accessing external resources. We connect them to sustainable energy providers that bring the clean solar gadgets for pay-as-you-go system to rural communities that are off-grid. We connect them to private sector companies that have an interest in the community. So maybe they take them as agents for mobile money, or they take them on board as agents for other businesses. So they expand their businesses to rural areas. And we have a dream of establishing direct connections between them and also those ones who live in big cities, the ones who have migrated to Lusaka, or maybe those ones who have left the country and have become part of diaspora. So this is something that we would like to work on in the future, connecting communities to diaspora members. Then also we support communities with any burning issues that might affect them, because we are no longer an independent party. We have become an affected party. For example, a recent example, if a community was at risk of displacement, and we come on board and help mediate conflicts, and we also try to our level best to help find a durable solution together with local government and other stakeholders. So our approach respects the autonomy and the capacity of the community. But this is exactly why it clashes with how traditional funding is being delivered. Traditional funding does not accommodate funding approaches that emphasize, because they emphasize short-term projects, projects with unrealistic outcome. But it also clashes with the rationale for new impact investors and new innovative financing, because these new innovative financing institutions measure impact against scalability, the level of innovation, profitability, value for money. But we do not speak in the community philanthropy sphere. We do not speak this language. We don't understand burn rates. We don't understand key performance indicators, and we don't understand internal rate of return. Individuals of us might understand if we are economists, but as a group, as a collective, we don't work with those terms. So these kind of practice are definitely set up for failure, and this is exactly what we see in the space of climate financing, why funding is not trickling down to local actors. So I would like to stop here. And hand over to you. Thanks, Ese.
Thank you so much, Barbara. I think you touched on, this is a perfect segue to my question to Moses, really around this, how do we measure for success, this accountability and transparency piece? You know, how can the diverse accountability requirements of different international aid, international and local actors and communities be considered really in ways that don't create more division, but really complement and build on each other, and that allow success to be measured in more than just one way. As you mentioned, you know, some of the terminology and framing is foreign to local communities, and you know, first you have to spend time understanding what those concepts are before you can now apply that into your work. So my question is really, Moses is our next speaker, is like looking at these different ways of measuring success. What would be your perspective and advice in how we go about this, including international actors or players as well as community actors as well?
Thank you, Ese, and thank you, Graciela and Barbara, for setting up the tempo. I think really, first of all, in terms of measuring success, one would be asking through whose lens we talking about success. We do not want to use the lens of the person that has given the money, because this is an intervention that is done in the community, and therefore success should be through the lens of the people in the community. Now, in terms as a way really of addressing that, I think one of the things that really, as the Uganda National NGO Forum and the kind of work that we do, that is first of all to challenge the narrative around accountability, because every time we're talking about development, the way we understand it, and then we talk about accountability, it takes us into the old narrative that when it comes to development, all what matters is money. And because that is all what matters, then we have to be talking about accountability, and that accountability is often upwards. But as we discuss this subject, I think it's very important to understand that communities, and every time we talk about community philanthropy, the key word there for me is the community, is that within communities, the communities themselves have assets. And I think what community philanthropy tries to leverage is to leverage these community assets. And this could include anything ranging from money, ranging from knowledge and expertise, skill sets, relationship, and networks. And I think it's important that we pay attention to these community assets, that we are able to deploy these community assets. Because when we deploy these community assets, what happens is that we're then able to give development a new dimension. We are able to trigger community voice and community power as well. And we change the narrative of that communities do not have voice, because everybody has got a voice. The only difference is that only a few of us have got the mic. So when we start putting attention to these community assets, by essence, we are already starting to say, yes, the communities, we have power, they have got voice. And every time we grow the civic agency in communities, we are changing language. And Barbara was talking about language, because language is important. We stop now looking at the communities as beneficiaries, and instead we are looking at them as co-investors. Now, when we look at these communities as co-investors, we start reimagining the system. And reimagining the system, we are no longer referring to the community as beneficiaries. We are calling them co-investors. And we are starting to take a collective journey to equitable partnerships. We are starting to take a collective journey from what we have now as the power system to an ecosystem. And now in this ecosystem, we are going to look at the funders, those who have resources, maybe the INGO industry, the national NGOs that sometimes act as middlemen for the resources, and then of course the community. So these four actors, and how our conversation plays out in this fourth between funders, INGOs, the national NGOs and communities, is for me what is the ecosystem. And once we are able to understand the different actors in this ecosystem, what the dynamics of within the ecosystem, as I said, then not only are we moving away from the power system, but also moving into the ecosystem. Now, to be able to do that, as I said, whether I talk about accountability, it's important that we appreciate the lens through which we are looking at, and that we also do not look at accountability just through the lens of risk. Because what we need to be paying attention to here in terms of us addressing community philanthropy and reimagining the sector is that the current system, the current dominant system as we know of it today, presses attention to more of risk transfer as opposed to risk sharing. And I think we cannot say that risk should just be transferred, and therefore we are going to be applying all manners of frameworks and all manners of tools to be able to mitigate that risk. It's important that we know, in terms of changing language, in terms of changing narrative, that we are moving away from risk transfer to risk sharing. And what does this mean? It entirely means that communities themselves are taking a risk on working with you who has money, because the fact that they are actually being able to accept your idea, which is a foreign idea, and they are actually investing their time to work with you, that in itself is a risk. And remember, the communities never did a due diligence on you as the one with money. It is actually the one with money who does due diligence. The conversation around the reverse due diligence is a new conversation. But it is important to appreciate that, from the word go, communities have been risk takers, and we take risks to those that have the resources. And so that for me is an important aspect to appreciate, that when communities work with those who have resources, first of all, they've taken that risk. And so what that essentially means is that, as we talk about accountability, as we talk about risk, as we talk about compliance, it's important to appreciate that there is going to be need for trust. And trust between the communities, trust between the national NGOs and those that perhaps have money. And like they always say, trust takes real time to build. It's not an event. I always like making reference to a Dutch proverb, the Dutch proverb that goes that trust comes on foot, but trust lives on a horse. And essentially, it means that it's a process to be able to develop the trust between the communities. But when that trust is actually disturbed by requests of accountability, requests of frameworks, requests of application of tools, that trust will immediately leave. And when it will leave, it will leave on a horse. So I think the point here is for us really is that the system as it were right now is a system that is ripe for change. And for us to be able to change that system, we are going to have to change the mindset, and the mindset of those who come to work into communities. And what that means is that we're going to have to understand that this is a process. It's a mindset process. It takes time. There is a need to establish trust, and that all requires time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Moses. You always have such powerful ways of sort of landing the message. And I would sort of, before we move on to the next questions, I would say, this idea of mindset shift, I think traditionally communities have been viewed as places where problems, you have a problem to be solved, versus communities actually having assets and agency and voice and things like trust building, as you mentioned, which is really important. I'll go into my last question for all speakers, and you can decide amongst yourself who wants to lead. But I also just want to say one housekeeping note. On your right-hand slide, right hand of the screen, there's this Slido. And this is an opportunity for you to post questions or ask questions either directly to one particular speaker or to the whole group. So please do take advantage of that and post your questions up there. So I guess, thinking about using philanthropy, community philanthropy as truly a tool for transformative change, what are some of the principles and approaches to the work that has enabled you to really build trust? Things like dignity and what Barbara called collective philanthropy. How do you actually do this? How does this actually work? What are some of the principles, approaches, tactics maybe that you do to actually build trust? Since all of your organizations are based in the community, you're embedded right there. You're not flying in with some prepackaged, glossy solution to problems. How do you build trust? What does this actually look like? And this question is to all three of you, so you can decide who wants to take it first.
I can go first. I will be really very brief, but I think that trust is really the key issue for having, for having the community philanthropy developed. And I think that it's something that we need to think about, because as I mentioned during my speech, in Brazil, we have a really philanthropic sectors that does not donate to civil society organization. And I think that this is related to trust, because they don't trust civil society organizations. So if you don't trust in the capacity of civil society or movements or groups, in the potential of their transformation, if you don't trust that investing in communities, because you don't recognize them as key actors of transformation, it's something that we need to think about. And I think in Brazil, it's really a problem, because civil society was really under attack, not just during Bolsonaro's government, but I think in general we have all the time attacks to civil society, because and to NGOs and to funds and foundations, because the idea is that they are just interested in money and not in transformation. So I think that it's really a political issue that we need to think about. Trust it's not just something simple issue. It's something that we need to think about. And on the other hand, something that I want to highlight, it's that maybe we need to think that development is completely connected to citizenships and access to rights. Because if you don't link citizenships to development, we will consider just development in a capitalism way. So we need to overcome this kind of thoughts and think about the importance to access to rights, because without rights we don't have any kind of development and we don't have any kind of democracy. So those are the things I wanted to highlight. I don't know if I have answered the question, but those are my impressions.
Yeah, you have. Moses or Barbara, do you have anything to add before I go into the questions that are coming from the audience?
I think, I said building trust, if you say, how do you touch trust? You can't touch trust. So it's not, something mechanistic. But I think, first of all, it's important to underscore that this is going to be a process. It takes time. But a few things. That one, that we need to start appreciating that the communities where we do work have money. And actually it is warm money as opposed to the cold money that is from the developments. And I always like the analogy of warm versus cold money. Maybe cold money is because it comes from the development partners in cold winters. But the community money is warm in the sense that it celebrates relationships. And when you give money in communities, we do not ask them to fill log frames. When we give the money to communities, we don't ask them to fill certain matrices. It's relational. It's relational. And because it's relational, it's easy to start building up trust. But equally important also in terms of building trust is to appreciate that there is residual expertise, there is residual knowledge within communities. And when we appreciate that, we stop coming in with the romantic words like expatriates. And instead, the communities who have lived with a problem, they have the answers. We start appreciating the subsidiarity principle that those closer to the problem have the solution. I cannot imagine how somebody from Europe would come to teach my grandmother about organic farming when we have been organic farmers from ages. My grandmother is not an expatriate, but my grandmother is a traditional wisdom specialist. And so, we start appreciating the traditional wisdom specialist. And that's the way that when we do, we are starting to build trust. But also maybe the other important thing is that we build trust when we are at the same level. And I already think that it's important we remove the I from the INGO. So because, we in the South were the NGO. Those in the North are INGO. But, when we remove the I, we all become NGOs. And, this whole subject of international NGO doesn't make a lot of sense because every NGO is national in its location. Even Oxfam is national in Oxford in the UK. And now my organization in Uganda is a national NGO, but when it goes to work in Malawi, it becomes, or in Zambia, it's international with that respect. So this whole configuration of putting I, then we give power, we give privilege to them, and then it deconstructs the process of trust building, And so that's important. But very, very finally, I think if we're going to build trust, the current system as we know of it is sick. Others would describe it as pathological ill. Others would say it is structural fraud. And I think the only way you can get treatment is when you accept sickness, when you accept you are sick. So when the current system appreciates that it is sick and is, needs to be changed, then we can then go in and start actually providing remedy. And the way of providing remedy is a way of trust because you get treatment from the doctor you trust. And so the current system is pathologically ill and needs clinical attention. And part of that clinical attention is going to come from the communities. And that would be the starting of establishing trust.
Thank you, Moses. I think that analogy of accepting that first you are accepting the fact that the system is sick or that you are sick really has an undertone of power, right? Power dynamics. So accepting that you're sick is letting go of power. And that's, conversations around the shift of power movement. Some have argued that it shouldn't be shift of power. Maybe it's grab the power or take the power, right? Because somebody has to accept that one, yes, you're sick and that you need help or that you need to take medication, but that giving up of power, that's where the tension is. So how do we share power? How do we make sure that there's a space, an enabling environment that really allows for different voices and different perspectives to be heard and to be seen, and that it's not just tokenism, right? It's not just, okay, we have a space for women, we have a space for youth, we have a space for human rights issues or gay rights issues, but really that they are seen and used as a way to now drive change. We have about 15 minutes left of this conversation, and there have been some really good questions in the Slido poll, and I'll just try to go through some of the questions that have been upvoted or at least highlighted. I think the first one that just come into my screen, and I'm just taking them in any order, so it's not in the order that they were first posted, it's just what is popping up in my screen immediately. I think this question has already been touched on by Moses, but this is a question around how do we highlight accountability for community philanthropy, and what should that look like? I think if it needs to be different from the one for traditional models, since the metrics for measurement are also different. I think this might have already been answered by Moses and Barbara and Graciela as well. But if there's any additional thoughts around that particular question, we can you can answer that. Another question that I thought would be interesting to hear your perspectives on is who should own community philanthropy and community foundations? Who owns that? Is there new different types of processes of legal governance actually needed? There has been some, I'm just reading the question, there has been some innovation in types of entities that are both for nonprofit and for profits. So why not for community resourcing? Really, this question is the ownership of community philanthropy and community foundations. Who should own it? I don't know who wants to try to answer that. Maybe Gracia or Barbara. Sorry, Barbara, I see you first on my screen.
That's a difficult one. We have been struggling with the issue of legal status of our own organization. We have a legal status, and we're also struggling with what is the adequate legal status of community philanthropy, local structures in. Unfortunately, the current legislation that is a legacy of colonialism is set up in a way that you cannot escape this three or four different registration types. If you're not registered on all this, you are outside the system and you are illegally operating. So unfortunately, I think that what it would need, and just to also emphasize that again, without a legal status, you're not allowed to handle money, to sign contracts. It's a huge obstacle, and not access government money, government funding. So I think what's needed, I don't have the answer to this, is and I understand in the UK you have something like a charity registration for charity. We don't have it here. And I think what is needed is a legal reform that accommodates this kind of movement, community philanthropy entity with a new structure. And I'm also wondering whether these kind of structures do actually need a board, because often I think boards do not do their work. They're just there as a cosmetic layer, particularly amongst civil society organizations that are unnecessarily, you're taking away resources, also resources of management, because there's so many issues to deal with. So I think there's a lot to be done about on the issue of what kind of ideal structure should there be. But unfortunately, we are bound by the legal framework in particular countries. But maybe other countries are more advanced. Not definitely not here. So I don't have the answer to this, but I know it's a difficult one.
I don't know, Graciela, do you have any thoughts on that? On that question,
maybe a short comment related to accountability, that it was another question. I think that we're going back to trust. I think that it's important to link accountability to trust, because if not, we are going to demand for community grassroots organizations, for example, bureaucracy processes that they are not prepared to do. So I think that, of course, we need to have accountability processes installed, but it is related to trust. So we need to find a balance between what we can demand from them and what it's really a problem that we are going to install related, for example, to accountability. So I think that, again, we have the link between accountability and trust. So if we trust them, we don't need to demand from them lots of, accounts and reports, financial reports, because this is going not in a good direction. Because if we trust them, we need to trust them in the whole process, and we need to trust them in a wide way.
Thank you. I don't know.
I think just quickly, really, for me, this subject of ownership, I think is a red herring and diversionary, but and it just tells you how the system is really running on the backbone of capitalism. That you must be the owner, there must be a board of directors, you must be registered. And I think in terms of challenging narratives and challenging language, I think that too needs to be challenged. Because I think I'm totally persuaded that in Africa we've had foundations. They may not be registered. They do not have boards. They may not be churning out huge chunks of money. But, in my community, the fact that there was a way of, sending money around from one family to another to help that, by and large, that speaks to the concept of philanthropy. And maybe it was a community circle, and some elderly woman who was very trusted in the community was the one who was handling the money and therefore dispenses it. That in itself was the foundation. But I mean, it didn't have a name of some person that so and so foundation, but it was a foundation. It did not have a board. It did not have a board of trustees. It did not have this and that. It did not have policies and all that. But it was a foundation by all intents and means. So this whole concept of community philanthropy is a concept that has been practiced here. But it sometimes the way it is talked about, it is some new thing that is introduced. And when families in the north start from, they die and pass on their riches, and then there is a foundation named after that family. A family foundation takes up that name, and they go through a registration process. Yeah, they own that. But I think in terms of concept, it has been there, and because it has existed here for quite a long time, I think as a concept, we can say we have full ownership. And when I say we, is that we in Africa own the concept, but we do not have registered foundations. So this whole subject of registering, it's like the NGO. We have had civic formations for a long time. They weren't called NGOs. They weren't registered. They didn't need permits. They didn't need to renew whatever, but they were there. And that's the same subject around community foundations. So the citizen formations are not new. Philanthropy as a concept, and by extension, community philanthropy, is not new. It's been there, it's been with us. But once we start romanticizing this with board of directors, we want policies around it, then we make it look new, and then we begin asking, is it something that is coming from the north? No, it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. And if it is that, then it will be, the concept is really being stolen from us.
I think this idea that truly community philanthropy is central, right? It's always been with us. It's sort of the fabric of the way we are as Africans, or really as communities in the global South. So it's truly an ancestral practice, not something that is that was piloted in or came in from the global north. So I think that is a key part of understanding what we call in community philanthropy. Some are calling it local philanthropy. Whatever phrase or framing that you use, it is really the recognition that people have always gathered to problem solve their own problems. They've had their own ways of deciding and doing. In the last 5 minutes, I know there were a couple more questions, but I wanted to just ask this last question in terms of if you can give really quickly, maybe 1 minute each in this last 5 minutes that we have. What is your one lesson that you have harvested by doing this work of championing community philanthropy? One lesson, maybe it's a painful lesson, or it's a good aha moment or insight. Can you just share one lesson that you have learned or harvested in doing this work? And I'll start with Barbara. Again, you're just at the top of my screen here, so that's why.
Okay.
Starting with
I think, without wanting to think long about it, I think the first thing that comes to my mind is that when becoming the moving from an NGO to more like a community philanthropy organization, the staff that work in the field, they feel they are becoming interested parties. They become part of the community, and I can see how their interests and how their commitment has partly changed. So because it's all about relationship building, and they're more enthusiastic, they're more interested, they're more encouraged, because they see they've become co-investors. And I think it has changed the DNA of the thinking of people. It has created a mind shift change. And I think moving from a cold NGO bureaucrat, technocrat, becoming a community facilitator does a lot to you as a person. And I think that that is some of what I observed with some of the staff in CGF. And that's very nice to see, I must say.
Yeah, truly change begins with you, right? So that's good. Graciela, same question to you. One key lesson you've harvested from doing this work.
Okay, I think that community philanthropy, it's an approach, it's a vision, it's a way of doing. And I think that the most important thing in community philanthropy is exactly to recognize what already exists. And we need to strengthen what already exists in the communities. The idea is not to install agendas or initiatives or projects. On the contrary, the idea is to potentialize what already exists. So I think that community philanthropy, it's a key or it's a way of trying to understand transformation too, because we need to understand that transformation, it's not being done by big foundations, and white people. It's something that happens in territories and in different realities. So this is the most important lesson I need to share with you. I want to share with you.
Thank you so much. Moses, your last words in the last 2 minutes.
Over the past years, I've come to realize that what perhaps was a dream is no longer a dream. That the dominant system, the dominant development system, is not in hospice. It is actually not even in intensive care. It is dying. And right now, what we need to be doing is to be looking at what kind of good genes, if any, we can pick from the compost. And while we are picking up some of these good genes from the compost, that we are also at the same time appreciating and making it known, evangelizing everywhere, that the dominant system it had congenital genes which must be avoided. And these congenital genes are money, power, and privilege. So as we reconstruct the new system, let us only pick up the good genes. Let us avoid the congenital genes of power, privilege, and money. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Moses. It's hard to come after you and sort of summarize this, but this has been truly a really rich and productive conversation. I think in this, as we are transforming the aid sector, reimagining the sector, I think all of us have a role to play, right? And, you know, things like what Barbara was mentioning that truly changed us with us. And that community philanthropy is truly a practice that has always been there. So why not continue to use it and offer it as a potential pathway out of this dying system or this broken system that Moses, you've talked about, or that we've all talked about. So thank you so much to everyone. We are right at the top of the hour, and I'm really grateful for those who have stuck with us for the whole hour. Thank you so much. I know that it was put in the chat, but I wanted to just do this one promotional discount for the subscription to Alliance Magazine and the Nonprofit Quarterly. They are jointly running a subscription bundle. So you can get both magazines for 1 year for $69, saving you about $50 in that. So I think there's a Q&A code that will be shared with all who signed up for today's session. So again, thank you so much to Graciela, Barbara, and Moses. It's always great listening to you and joining with you on this road of shifting power, community philanthropy. So thank you so much, and good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending on where you're coming from. Bye-bye. Thank you so much, guys.